Hello, this is Ed McLaughlin again, and we're going to do another one-on-one. Today I have with me Wes McArtor, and Wes is the CEO of a company called NextEra. And in my opinion, NextEra has probably the most comprehensive database of office printing devices, certainly in the country and perhaps on the globe. I don't know if anybody, there's an extent of over 4 million devices that, and Wes can correct me if I'm wrong on that number, but over 4 million devices that he's monitoring right now. So when we talk about trends over time, I just didn't think there was another person to bring in to talk more informatively about it than Wes. So Wes, thanks for joining me, and welcome to One-on-One with Ed McLaughlin. It's a new venture, and I hope we find it interesting.
Well, excited to be here. Happy New Year.
You've got quite a base of equipment. What do you really see happening? What do you see the trends in volume and devices that we should be thinking about right now?
Well, that's a great question. When we started the business, we were more focused on finding out service cost and how to maximize efficiency and profitability in service. And that's what our core business was.
Mm-hmm.
As a function of COVID, I started creating a whole new set of reporting suites because that was the first question I got asked is what's happening, what's going on trend-wise with page volumes and parts volumes and all of the things. How's behavior changing? I think we've discussed in the past at the peak prior to the pandemic, and the caveat is it's all about customers who have existed in my data set the entire time frame. So I do have customers that come in and leave. So I had to monetize that or flatline that in a way that said, here's what it was before and after. So prior to COVID, we were doing about 12.5 billion pages a month.
Okay.
It bottomed out at 3.4.
Wow.
The peak recovery happened in August of last year. It came back to 10.7-ish.
Okay.
And then has not recovered from that. So currently it's at 8.7.
So we were in a decline for a while.
Yep.
And we were declining. I mean, I don't have an exact number, but I'm going to use an estimate of about 2 or 3% per year. So did that actually work out that we we went this giant drop off and then fell into what the decline normally had been?
I suppose if you amortized it out and said 3% over the last 5 years, would be off about 15% or so, right?
Well, in that ballpark, yeah.
In that ballpark, we're off about 24%.
So a little bit more.
Well, and I think the decline that was happening was that slow organic change in behavior. And what happened is COVID precipitated a faster behavior change.
Right.
So it pushed people to do business slightly different than they might have otherwise done it. So I think that, I think we're probably in that right space, but it just got pushed in a little faster timeline.
So when you're looking at this data that you see coming across, can you tell what's affecting the change in volume, or do you just see the results?
We just more or less see the results, but when you start breaking it out by segment and product type, you obviously see things like A4 page volumes didn't change all that dramatically. They were fairly flat from pre-COVID all the way through COVID, all the way out of COVID.
Okay.
Right? What changed significantly was that sweet spot SMB space for A3.
Okay.
Because obviously when they went home, they weren't printing on the Office device anymore. So you would expect to see that. Right. But what happened was the average monthly volume overall slid down. So pre-COVID, A3s were averaging about 11 to 1,200 pages a month.
Mm-hmm.
They're now about 800.
Okay.
So the whole usage of the product base, especially in A3, changed. A4s didn't change. They're still at 200 and something pages a month.
Okay.
That really.
So, I had noticed, if I digress a little bit and go back to another period in time, another big change in volume, I guess, would have been in the economic conditions that occurred around 2007, 2008. And we look back memory serves me correctly, volumes stopped growing around 2007 and began a gradual decline. And I noticed a significant drop in volume in 2008 during the economic downturn that we had. And then from that point on, there just seemed to be a continual decline. That I was a lot more active in that aspect, that side of the business at that time. And I attributed it to the way the processes were changing because of forced change in process because of economics. Are we seeing the same type of thing occur now?
I believe so. I think that when I look at the customer base and the products being adversely affected by COVID, there's been a relatively dramatic shift, in my opinion, into the way documents are handled. I'll never forget when I sat down with you a few years ago and you said paper is just simply a medium for moving information from one place to another.
Right.
Right. And I never forgot that, because that's so true. And what's changed is that moving a piece of paper from a home office to a corporate office is just not practical. And so it forced them to learn how to move that document from there to there. And they went back to the office, and the initial bump after the lockdowns kind of eased up, they went back to the old behavior, but then quickly started to realize that, wait a minute, it was way easier doing it the other way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they started going back. That and the transition of the age of the workforce. I think those two things are precipitating this process change, right? Because the Gen Zers and even some of the next generation before that don't really particularly care to print all that much.
I know a war baby that doesn't print that much.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly.
So I mean, you really begin to see, and you learn that it's about the content. And I have often said, and I don't mean to say this in any way condescendingly, we never really seemed to understand that our business was not about the pages in the paper.
Mm-hmm.
It was about the information on those pages in paper, and we built it around the click and the content, the click and the volume of the pages, because that was the economics that drove it. And certainly everyone has done very, very well by it. And I think there's a lot of more opportunity, but it's really about the content. And that's what put us into the workflow and made us part of the workflow. But that's not really where we kept our minds. And it's still about the content. So moving the content, just using a different medium to do it, it seems to me like there's still an enormous opportunity in the industry revolving around that content, and actually even finding more economical ways to accommodate the paper, because paper, although there's a dispute going around, the paper will reach a point where it's going to be gone. I just don't see that happening. I mean,
no, I think we're in the midst of a change, and print will, the value proposition around print will change. Not that print's going away or that it's gone, just the value proposition will change slightly. How valuable is it for me to put the information I need to move from me to you on a piece of paper to do that?
It's more convenience today than it was, say 10, 15 years ago. Certainly 20 years ago, the content was there, but the pages were important because paper was very much part of the process, and it really helped the workflow. I'm not seeing that as much today, and I'm just, it sounds to me like the data that you're analyzing and seeing on a day-to-day basis confirms that it's really moving more and more towards digital movement of the content.
Correct.
But the fact that the people use paper for the conveniences that it has, and even some security to a certain point. I mean, there's a certain, it's much more, it is the secure transport. And it's a great leave behind. You don't leave behind digital content. You can, but it's going to get lost in the shuffle. So the written content can kind of be left behind sometimes, and it's still going to be around. And I marvel. I'll tell a story. I'm talking about content. A friend of mine that he had a pretty large law firm at one time, and it was involved. He was a partner of a very large law firm. He decided, okay, that's it. I've had enough of this. I'm going to go on a sabbatical and I'm going to go a trip around the world. And he did. When he came back, I said, what are you going to do? He said, you know what? I miss it. I'm going to start a law firm again, but this time I'm going small. Well, he's not so small. 5 or 6 layers, he's not so small. It's just the nature of the beast. But what I marveled at when I went into his office, and I never thought I'd see this, he's got about maybe 10 lawyers now, and he doesn't have any file cabinets.
Yeah.
There's no file cabinets at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, you know, that's really unusual for a lawyer. I said, that why? He said, well, because every time we get done a case, we scan the content and we put them into electronic files, and all our files are electronic. He said, you see those books, and he has 3-ring binders across the like a tabletop. They're all my active cases, the ones I'm actively involved in. He said, and I'll use paper there, and I mark up different things at different pieces I get in, and when I'm going to revise something, I always take it from the computer and I revise it and I cross things out, and then we put it back into the computer again. So when this is all done, when this case is settled, that book will be what's necessary, will be scanned into the permanent record, and it's all destroyed. Yeah. So the paper's still being used, but being used very, very differently than what it was being used before. And I don't think that's unique to that particular profession or to his particular firm. I think that that's just the reality of what we're beginning to see in workflow process today.
Well, the solutions have advanced to make it easier and more convenient. The you know, if you remember back when I started the very first laptop project at a manufacturer that I was working for, you know, and it had a 20 gig hard drive or something, and I was going, how could you possibly ever fill a 20 gig hard drive, right? and they fail all the time, right? So it was a common thing to have a hard drive fail or have memory fail or something. So, you know, the idea that I'm going to store a very valuable document in a digital form someplace relative to how easy it is to lose it was a scary proposition. And
memory was expensive back then.
Yeah, and the cloud and the reliability of hardware, all of that's changing in a way that there's ways of securing that document so that you don't have to worry about the future of it, right? Where paper was, short of a flood or a burn down or a tornado, you weren't going to lose the paper.
Right. And file sizes were actually in some ways bigger back then. And then on top of that, because people were using TIFF files to leave documents behind, and usually were proprietary TIFFs, and it was all sorts of problems in handling digital information. With the PDF, that all changed, and it became portable across everything. And we don't think about these little incremental adjustments that occurred over the technology life that really made significant changes in the way that we work.
I remember when the argument against ink was that it faded in the file cabinet.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's like, okay, if it fades and I can't read it, it's not valuable.
Well, there were even some copiers that used to produce stuff that used to fade in the file cabinet too, but we won't go there, even though they're not in the business anymore. But that it's so true. I mean, it's really been a changing market. So if paper's not going to go away, but volumes are going to continue to decline, and I really believe firmly there'll be a leveling at some point in time where it won't, from a percentage standpoint, it won't be declining by the same amounts. But we have to work differently, it seems to me, than what we worked in the past. So what sort of areas do you see where the efficiency could be picked up?
Well, I mean, I've said this for many years. We've enjoyed margins that were flexible enough and big enough that it allowed a certain amount of inefficiency, and it became normal. And to me, that's the major problem we face as an industry, is that there are very few places left in the world where you can get 50+% gross margins and and be bad,
Mhm.
right?
That's true.
And we can do that still. And my data proves that over and over again. But we've become a little bit complacent in the fact that I believe a lot of dealers that have tried to manage into other diversification strategies where margins aren't that good, if they
Mhm.
take the same discipline they put in print into that other space, it's a failure.
That's an interesting point.
Because the other place doesn't have the margin flexibility to make mistakes.
Mm.
You know, when I look at an industry where, you know, I use analogy in the past, if you took your car to the shop and 50% of the time they didn't fix it properly, how long would you use that shop?
Yeah.
Probably never again. But in our industry, that is so normal, customers don't even think about it.
They have to be thinking it's somewhere along the way, somebody's going to think about it because they're going to compare it to other industries or other ways to get things done.
Well, it's like the sales process. I joke about it all the time, is that the only reason the customer thinks the way they do is because they're hearing the same message from everybody that's talking to them. And it's the sales rep from every other dealership going and telling them the same thing for the same reason. What it's going to take is somebody coming in there and telling them a different paradigm. And that's when it'll start to change.
I suspect so, or when margins get pressured. But it's interesting. You made an interesting observation there. I remember many years ago when people were talking about some of this diversification. One of the issues that I raised and emphasized a number of different times, if you're going to diversify, that's a great idea. But before you do, make sure your own core business is in solid footing before you make that transition, because whatever you're going to do isn't just an opportunity. It's going to be a cost center before it becomes a profit center.
That's right.
But my reasoning for it was a little bit different than what you just said. I mean, my reasoning for it was just keep things, even fitting the model and making things work as best you can. But it sounds to me like there's even more of an opportunity in there, because even if I make it run okay, as the model calls it to be, I've actually got to be better than that, because when I apply my disciplines to the next technology, those disciplines aren't going to work, even though I've made enough money to support emphasizing over here. That's an interesting observation. And I wonder how many people take that into consideration as they begin to look to diversify.
Well, as we've diversified into financials with our back end office products and our financial reporting products, I don't have a single dealer of the 35 or so that do our financial model that aren't hitting the benchmark.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not a single one of them that couldn't do 10 or 15 points to the bottom line more than that, if they would pay attention.
Well, you know, I've got a lot of respect for the model, I mean, and have for a long time. And I don't want to in any way disparage it, but no matter who I speak to about the model, they all agree there's too many people hitting it. And it was devised at a time when the level of reliability of these devices were significantly different than they were today. I mean, we had analog parts, they were mechanical, and break fix was real break fix. You needed guys with wrenches and screwdrivers to get out there and make these things work again, and they would fix devices inside the machine. Today, it's a swap out. It's a digital swap out of components, and we don't spend the break fix time fixing things. So something really should change in the model as a consequence of that.
Well, I think, you know, the model is a great guidepost, and too many dealers get complacent with I'm at the model. And I think the question really should be what's possible.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point.
That's what I try to tell people about our data, is it's not about being average. It's about going for what's possible. And the only way you know what's possible is finding somebody else that's achieving it. Right? And what is actually possible? Can I get there? Because if you know for a fact you can get there, why aren't you striving to get there? When the model says, okay, I'm already there. Right? Where am I going to go from here?
I'm good.
I'm good enough.
But good enough anymore? or do we have to be better than good enough?
Well, to your point, is that any diversification strategy generally starts off as a cost center, whether you're investing in buying the expertise or making mistakes and learning the expertise, it's a cost, right? Why not extract every potential penny out of your core business where you already know everything, supposedly, extract every penny of that to make that cost center less painful as an investment. And then you've got room to make mistakes, or you've got room to buy the expertise that you need, right? But why would you leave money on the table in your core business and then go do all of those things? Because inevitably you'll end up doing the same thing with this new diversification strategy, right? Leaving money on the table that you shouldn't.
Seems logical to me. And you're also bringing bad habits to the new model.
Correct.
That's
true.
Pretty interesting observation. So where are some of the areas? I mean, we've talked before a couple of times about some of the areas that we're somewhat deficient in, and I know that you've got some favorite areas you go to, such as first time fix and so forth. That kind of impacts the productivity of the service organization itself, and the operating tables that they operate under, how many people they're dispatching and using in the field. But I think there was some other thing. Well, we were talking one time about parts obsolescence, and I think you've brought up a statistic that was pretty alarming to me at the time. You refresh my memory on that.
Well, every dealer, we deal in an industry of obsolescence because we flip products so quickly, right? So in that 3 to 5 year leaf cycle where the product is flipping, the new products coming out, we don't have the logistics expertise in most dealerships to plan ahead for that, right? So as I come to the end of that 5 year and I'm moving all this equipment out, the parts person is ordering parts based off the demand of the technicians, right? The equipment's getting older, so the demand actually starts increasing as it ages, right? They start ordering and increasing their inventory stock just about the time the salespeople are going to start flipping it. And then all of a sudden there's no equipment in the field that can even use that part.
Okay.
And so we've not invested, in my opinion, in the complicated logistics role the parts person has for that business. You know, an old adage that I always use is, for the vast majority of parts managers, not to disparage them because there's a lot of really good ones out there, but a lot of them end up being technicians who made customers mad, so they took them out of the field and that's where they put them, or they're a relative of the owner.
Okay.
And we ran into that a lot in our early years, right? It's not so much the same now, but when I start looking at the amount of obsolescence that exists within the dealer groups and within our customer base, it's very obvious to me still there's not an investment in the logistics strategy of how do we do this, right? They either buy, the manufacturers are forcing purchase quotas on them, making assumptions about page volume that are inaccurate, right? So if page volume is declining and the manufacturer still says, hey, based on the MIF and field, we think you should be buying $20,000 of parts a month. In order to get your discount, you got to buy $20,000 a month. That doesn't take into account what's really going on.
But
right?
that could be a reward mechanism that could be putting some pretty significant financial deficits in place in the reward system.
Absolutely is. That's part of the reason, and it's the timing of that, right? So when in the product life cycle do I have to start changing my purchase behavior relative to what's going on in the field? And there's not really anything in the systems today that helps forecast that very well.
But that seems to strike to me that could have an impact not just on the profitability, but on the cash flow of a company, because you're putting a lot of cash out. And while the profitability may not hit right away, because you probably have built a reserve mechanism into place into your P&L. If you've got a good CFO, he's put reserves and contingencies in there, so you don't see that, because it's being taken out gradually. You really don't see the impact of it. But if you look at it over a period of time, you've probably wasted, it could be as much as millions of dollars of
absolutely is
of parts that you could be putting into cash, into operations, into more people, into expanding your business into a better competitive position. There's so many places it could go, and then the reserves could be cut back, and your profitability increases as well as your cash opportunity.
And I'll take the green approach and go, okay, I've got all of these parts that now have to be thrown away.
You know, some people might dismiss that, but actually, that's not insignificant at all, because these are not easily disposed of materials in some cases.
Yeah, the heavy metals, chemicals, and
Yeah.
all of the things are all, we've tried to create through our Overstart Parts Network a way to reutilize that stuff and get it to people that still have it. Because a lot of it depends. A lot of dealers will take the dollar buyout and hold machines that are exceptionally profitable and keep them in the field rather than just flip them for the sales benefit, and they need those parts. So it's creating a network by which people that have those parts that are obsolete there and put them someplace where they can be utilized is a way better process to me than simply writing it off and throwing it in the trash at some point.
Yeah, and it's a painful step into the trash too. And if you haven't done the reserves, chances are you're sitting on, you just let it sit there.
Yeah,
which is even worse, because it only makes the problem become even more significant over time. That's
I went into a dealership back in the early days of my business, and mind you, this was in the late 90s, early 2000s, and they still had mechanical calculator parts in inventory.
that's harmful.
But that's where the business grew up, and it was almost like a nostalgic thing. And I go, but if it's on your books, it's terrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and is it really? I mean, they may have, if it just sat in inventory like that, then it is on their books. But and I know that it's not something that happens, by the way, just inside the dealerships, because I'm not going to throw the manufacturer under the bus, but I will tell a story of a manufacturer that I was involved in. So I was only involved in most of them, so you can't figure out which one it was. But I remember going in, and they had basically discontinued a large chunk of rather popular machines. And so they had eliminated this product line, but they had kept buying and storing and making these drums for these things. So when I went in, I saw this wall of drums that were across the back of the wall. And I said, well, what are they for? And they said, well, they're for this particular machine. And I went, you haven't made that machine in 4 years. Yeah, it's true, but we've got these drums for it. So we did it in the calculation. It was 270 years worth of drums on that wall, based upon the existing population that was out there today. So, I mean, these kind of things can happen. Absolutely. And they happen pretty regularly. Not regularly, but when they do happen, they can be very, very, very painful.
Yeah, no, absolutely does.
So what are some of the other areas that, I mean, one of the things that people are talking about is the difficulty to keep technicians, or get new technicians in today's environment. And there's a concern about the aging force of the technical people and bringing them on with another generation of technicians. How significant is that? And how can we help improve that situation?
Well, I think there's multiple things, and you're absolutely right. I did a presentation for ICDA the other day where we were talking about the fact that the average age of a technician, I think Copier Careers puts it at 56 or 57, right? And almost everybody is still at some level a tenure-based pay structure. So that means that these folks are getting as high a pay as they're probably ever going to get, and might need to be more to keep them because of that difficulty to replace them. Flip side of that is that their expertise is difficult to replace, right? They've been around long enough. They know a lot. Their efficiency is probably, it's not as good as it can get, but it's probably so much better than that new person I'm going to bring on who doesn't have all that experience over time. So part of my opinion is a strategy that dealers need to fix is they need to be really hard thinking about what product can I sell and how can I sell it in a way that maximizes that efficiency or that reliability component, right? There are products that are more reliable than others. Do I have to sell everything, or do I have to sell more of one model because that consolidates the expertise needed to do that? Right. So think of the McDonald's or the Southwest Airlines model, or the, you know, McDonald's, they didn't put in automatic ice makers because people were too stupid to put ice in the cup. They did it because they wanted to regulate how much ice went in the cup.
Right.
Because of the variable that happened, right? So when I look at things like first call effectiveness, part of it's related to the fact that the average technician works on 180 different models of equipment. How
Wow.
are they ever going to be great at all of that? They'll be good at some of it, they'll be better at some of it, but they're going to be bad on some of it too.
Well, that only seems to make sense.
Yeah, and then
They're not all the same.
Your inventory system is a mess because you've got so many models that are moving through the sales cycle and manufacture cycle, right? That you've got to try to deal with. And the fact is, our stuff still breaks more than it needs to in a lot of ways because business model is still around selling parts and service. And if it doesn't break, how do you justify service contract? Right. So I have dealers that generate service calls just because the customer sees a technician there and they assume the machine is broke. Right.
That can be good and bad.
It can be good and bad. It depends on how you manage it. But at the end of the day, you have a hard time reselling a service contract if they never see you ever.
Well, that's true.
Right.
That's true.
So part of our model is going to change as a function of selling something other than break fix, which is security and, you know, some of that, the supply delivery mechanisms and guarantees that we put in place. But, you know, as long as the machines break this often, this tech deficit's going to start really hurting us as an industry, because if things don't get proven reliability, which they have much greater reliability than today than yesterday.
Oh,
but
infinitely better.
If that doesn't continue, how are we going to replace this aging workforce with people who don't want to do break fix? Because that's our challenge. It's not that there's not young people to hire. They just don't want to do that job.
Right.
They want to program. They want to be on the keyboard. They want to sit at a desk. They don't want to go out and deal with hostile customers and, you know, finicky machines that they got to get their hands really dirty to get fixed.
Well, there's more and more devices that are less prone to that mechanical failure, particularly in the office environment, let's say, and in the industrial print environment and places like that. I don't know that you'll ever really be completely there. I don't think you can be. But what about large format? Are you monitoring anything with large? There seems to be a bigger increase and bigger use of large format than probably there ever was before.
Yeah, I think that there is a huge opportunity in our space to go into what I would classify as specialty print.
Okay.
Right? Large format vinyl, you know, there's a lot of that going on with vinyl wraps and vinyl signage and you know, all the things they're doing there. That they're printing on wood, they're printing on ceramics, they're pre-printing ceramic tile that way, they're printing fabric. All the custom t-shirt places that you can find, go online and order a t-shirt with your picture on it kind of thing. Those are all inkjet printers.
Right.
At some level, right? It's a specialty market for sure, but it's just not any different than production print, in my opinion. It's just a different market.
It's a different market of the production print, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of, I think those places will survive, because as this technology improves, the type of inks that we're using and the durability of those inks and all of that technology is evolving relatively quickly to make those, what used to be a printer that would only go in a very small niche, becoming almost universal. It's like 3D printers. Remember when 3D printers were so far out of the reach of the average person, you couldn't touch them. Now you can buy them for a couple $100.
Yeah, well, 3D printing, that's a whole different conversation. I mean, we got involved for a lot. Do you monitor any 3D equipment at all?
Yeah, we do this. We monitor the service there's not a page volume per se, because it's more of a supply consumable
Right.
model. Right, but we do monitor the service on them.
What level of 3D device do you monitor? I mean, there's so many different types of
Yeah, I mean,
real,
I don't know that I
real
have any
production devices or the tabletops.
mostly tabletops. There are a few production centers where they put in a bunch of 3D printers and all the jobs come there. So
Mhm.
the doesn't own it, they're just paying for the output of the product.
Mhm.
But I think that's still an opportunity we don't leverage as well as we probably could as an industry.
Well, I've been guilty of saying, and I still believe it to be true, the only thing that 3D print and our industry have in common is the word print. I
Yeah,
mean,
no, that's true. That's true.
I mean, it's not to say that that's the same sales process. And there was a large group of people that really believed that this channel could just run right through the 3D print, just turn it on its ear. But the fact of the matter is, that's just not going to be the case, because that's an engineering decision, a manufacturing decision, much more process. You're not talking about speeds and feeds, and how fast you can do the job is important. That's for sure. But what kind of material do you work with, and how complex of a device can you put together? What can you make components, complete components? I mean, there's such an engineering expertise that's required in that sales organization that it just doesn't fit our organization, my opinion anyway.
I do think there's two other places there's a similarity, though. One is that they need a recurring service contract revenue because the machines do require service and they do consume something.
Business model wise, it fits. I will agree. I think that from a business model wise, it's a complete parallel to the existing business. But from a sales expertise standpoint, to make it grow and to make it work and to support it is completely different.
But that's not unlike managed IT. The expertise and the processes that have to go into diversifying and changing that don't fit the copier model in that way.
I agree, which is one of the reasons that I'm not against moving to any other diverse processes or sales organization type thing to put into, and IT makes some sense. But when we say IT services, in the last 10 years, that's changed dramatically. What was IT services a number of years ago was managing somebody's desktop. That's really not the case anymore. I mean, it's network and security and a lot of other things that are necessary. Disaster recovery, there's all sorts of things that need to be done in IT management that were not really relevant to the small business user a few years ago. So it's a different business.
I think what's even scarier to me is that if you listen to Peter Kajala over at Service Leadership and ConnectWise, when he does his presentation, 47% of the managed service providers, if I have that number correct, are not making any money. And they're dedicated managed service providers. They're not copier dealers doing managed IT. So if that's their core competency and they can't make money at it, that's scary to me.
Well, I found this comment very interesting. I know some people that are quite a few people in the IT space, and they're dealing with enterprise level companies. And at that level, the decision makers are saying to the providers, well, information is just a commodity. We think of it as being like the backbone of everything, and it is. I mean, you can't run your business without the data, and you can't run your business without moving information around. But at a high level, inside many of these organizations, they view it as just a commodity, and they treat it, if they view it that way, they treat it that way. Because you've often heard me say perception is not reality, but it does dictate priorities.
Yeah. Well, and you know, I can go back ancient times when I started my business, there was not such a thing as the internet, really. And so I would print a report and keep 2 copies, and I'd mail one to the customer, and we would review the data over the phone. because that was the only way we could get two pieces of paper that had the exact same information on it, right?
Right.
Obviously, we don't do that today, but that's that transition, right, of information flow and how it gets from point A to point B. And when we started, big data wasn't even a thing.
Right.
Now it's a ubiquitous term that has, almost no meaning, because that's all it is, big data.
Well, when we see all the things that are starting to happen in technology, the future with edge computing and where we are with the cloud and some of the cloud technologies and infrastructures, and that's not as smooth a transition as everyone in our industry talks about, as if it's like, oh, it's just things are just moving to the cloud. Yeah, they are, but not quite as simply and as smoothly as you might suspect. I mean, because a lot of large enterprise organizations have moved to the cloud and pulled back because they realized that the transition to the cloud wasn't well thought out and they didn't really know how to get there. So the same thing is true with all other processes. And all these things are going to affect our business in some way, shape, or form. We will see things come back to where they used to be, and then you'll see them move away again faster. So the ins and outs and ups and downs and where you are in this industry, I think, still needs to be focused on. And the thing that I find most interesting in our conversation is the need to focus on the productivity of the individual and the organization, and the information that your data supplies them certainly puts them in the right direction. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, we come from an industry where, again, the age of the technicians is in the 50s, the service managers is in the 60s.
Well, yeah.
We just had a review not too long ago with an owner that was going, they're telling me we're as good as we're going to get. Everything is running good, but I don't know that I feel it that way. Can you audit me and tell me? Right. And we ended up, unfortunately, kind of upsetting people because, but yeah, there's plenty of opportunity. Want to work hard enough to go get it. Right. And as far as the service department was concerned, there was nothing you could do. Everything was as good as it was going to get. There was just absolutely zero way to do better. But that's that kind of older school mentality where we've done this long enough. We kind of think we know everything. And we're not challenging the status quo. Because why? Because the model says we're there.
Well, I can tell you that I'm in a higher demographic than the group you just mentioned. So they're all kids to me, those 60-year-olds. They're just youngsters in the business. And I'm still learning. So if I'm still learning new things, so are they. And if they're not learning things, they get their minds turned off to it, because there's new things happening in the way that we go about it every single day. And we got to keep our minds open to this process change.
And we've got to understand this next group of employees that are coming in can't be managed the way the 50 and 60-year-olds in our business are. They don't want to be managed that way. You've got to be able to give them information, and you've got to be able to give them data. They want constant feedback. They want to be coached and developed and worked with. When I was a technician, my service manager just said, as long as all of your customers are happy, I'm happy. And so the focal point was, didn't matter how bad the machine run, as long as the customer wasn't calling and screaming at my boss, all was good.
There's a certain logic to that in a way.
Right. But it didn't matter if the machine was profitable or not.
Right.
Because with the margins were there.
Right.
And we could get away with it. Then it's like, oh, wait a minute. Now you've got to do a certain number of calls per day. Well, that sans how quality was the call, right? Then we started focusing on the quality of call and finding that balance between quality and quantity. And, then the machine started changing and technology started changing. So it's never stopped changing. It's just that I don't think our expectations are set high enough. What's possible? Right? What can we do better, and be constantly doing the old Kaizen model of what's, how much better can we be in constant improvement? We just kind of get to a point and go, okay, that's good enough. Customers are happy. We're making the model.
Well, that's that's a great point, and probably the point we should leave everybody with, the thought process of it isn't good enough to be what's defined as good. It's really, you have to look at what's possible and what can you do better in that area? How can you improve beyond it? It should be the mantra going forward in a mature market, I
No,
suspect.
absolutely. I mean, if you're saying the average, let's just say I'm shooting for an average of first call effectiveness of 70%. That's awesome. You should be doing that.
Mhm.
But I promise you, not every tech you have is 70%. So what are you focusing on the techs that are 30 and 40 and 50%? Or the equipment that's not running as well as it should? You're never at 100%. So you've got to be willing to climb to the top of the tree and pick the harder fruit to get
Mhm.
all of the fruit, right?
Uh, Boy, that's a good place to leave this conversation and let people think about it. There's so many more areas that I would love to dig into with you, because the knowledge and all the information you've garnered from the data that you review and look at every day is just amazing. And I see opportunities in account development, account management, which I think are another area that we've gone off the rails on. But this area is of building the foundation of your business. Wes, I can't thank you enough. It's been a great conversation.
It was an honor
I've
to be
enjoyed it
invited.
immensely, and I hope you have.
Absolutely. It was like I say, it was an honor to join you on this. I have the greatest respect for you and the mentorship you provided me over the years.
It's been an absolute joy on my part. Okay.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot. Thanks again. Bye.
Thank you.